Before we dive into this epic tale of human determination that will completely blow your mind, I need you to do something for me right now. Smash that like button. Seriously, smash it. Because you're about to witness how a species dismissed as utterly hopeless became the deciding factor in a galactic war that had raged for 847 years. And drop a comment telling me which moment gave you the most chills, because trust me, there are going to be several that will leave you speechless. This isn't just another story about humans surprising aliens. This is about how the galaxy's most primitive species took a war that had consumed entire star systems for nearly a millennium and ended it in a matter of weeks. Get ready to feel some serious pride in what our species is capable of when everyone else has written us off completely. The war room aboard Nexus Prime stretched across 3 levels, its obsidian walls displaying real-time tactical data from 17 different star systems. Holographic projections of burning worlds rotated slowly in the center of the chamber, each one representing another front in a conflict that had consumed the galaxy for longer than human civilization had existed. High Commander Zethrak of the Saurian Empire stood before the central display, his 12-foot frame covered in ceremonial scales that gleamed like polished emeralds under the chamber's harsh lighting. His reptilian eyes, cold and calculating, studied the tactical readouts with the patience of a predator that had learned to wait centuries for the perfect moment to strike. 847 years, he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to emanate from the depths of his massive chest. 847 years of war, and we are no closer to victory than when this conflict began. Admiral Velthra of the Crystalline Collective materialized beside him, her form shifting between solid matter and pure energy as her consciousness flowed through the quantum matrices that served as her body. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made the air itself vibrate. "The mathematics are undeniable," she observed, her crystalline features reflecting the light of burning worlds. Each engagement results in precisely balanced losses. Each strategic victory is immediately countered by equivalent defeats. We have achieved perfect stalemate. General Morgoth of the Insectoid Hive Confederation clicked his mandibles in agreement, his compound eyes processing data streams at rates that would have liquefied organic brains. The chitinous plates covering his body bore scars from countless battles, each one a testament to the war's endless grinding brutality. Resource depletion across all combatant territories approaches critical thresholds, he reported, his voice a buzzing harmony created by thousands of vocal chambers working in unison. 17 star systems have been stripped of all useful materials. Population centers report civilian casualties exceeding 47 billion across all factions. The 3 commanders stood in silence, each representing a galactic superpower that had evolved over millions of years, developed technologies that could reshape matter at the atomic level, and built civilizations that spanned entire sectors of space. They were the pinnacle of their respective species' achievements, and they were losing a war against each other through sheer mathematical inevitability. "We need something new," Zethrak admitted, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Some variable that can break this cycle of predictable destruction." "All conventional strategies have been exhausted," Velthra agreed. "We require an unprecedented tactical approach." Morgoth's antenna twitched as he accessed data from the Hive's collective consciousness. "There is one possibility we have not considered. Intelligence reports indicate a primitive species in the Sol system has recently achieved basic interstellar awareness." Zethrak's scaled brow ridges rose in what might have been amusement. "You speak of the carbon-based mammals? The ones who still use chemical propulsion and electromagnetic radiation for communication?" "The same," Morgoth confirmed. "They call themselves humans." Analysis suggests they are approximately 2,000 years behind galactic technological standards. Admiral Velthra's form flickered as she processed the implications. Their technological limitations are indeed significant. However, they represent the only non-aligned intelligent species in the region. Perhaps an outside perspective could provide insights that our established doctrines cannot. What insights could primitives offer? Zethrak asked, though his tone suggested he was already considering the possibility. They fight with metal projectiles and chemical explosives. Their largest vessels are powered by controlled fusion reactions. They haven't even achieved unified planetary governance. Precisely why they might prove useful, Morgoth replied. Our warfare has evolved into predictable patterns because we all operate within the same technological and strategic frameworks. These humans exist outside those frameworks entirely. General Morgoth activated a holographic display showing Earth's primitive defense grid, a scattered collection of orbital platforms and chemical-fueled interceptor craft that looked like children's toys compared to galactic standard military hardware. Their neural patterns show emotional instability and irrational decision-making, he continued. What we consider flaws might actually represent adaptive advantages in unpredictable scenarios. Velthra studied the data, her quantum consciousness. Parsing information at light speed. The proposal has merit. Each of our civilizations could approach these humans separately, requesting alliance under the pretense of seeking fresh strategic perspectives, while actually using them as expendable reconnaissance forces, Zethrak added with predatory satisfaction. Their primitive technology would make them ideal for probing enemy defenses without risking valuable assets. The humans emotional. Nature would make them easy to manipulate, Morgoth agreed. They could be convinced that participation in our conflict serves some noble purpose. The three commanders exchanged what might have been considered smiles, though the expressions looked quite different on their alien features. Each was already formulating plans to contact Earth first to secure exclusive access to humanity's potential as cannon fodder. None of them suspected that they were about to encounter something far more dangerous than advanced technology or superior firepower. They were about to meet human ingenuity. 6,000 light-years away. President Elena Vasquez stood before the emergency session of the United Nations General Assembly, her face pale with the weight of an impossible decision. The vast chamber buzzed with urgent conversations in dozens of languages as delegates struggled to process what they had just been told. Ladies and gentlemen, President Vasquez began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's advanced acoustics. I know how this sounds. 3 separate alien civilizations, each representing galactic superpowers, have simultaneously requested military alliance with Earth. Each claims to be fighting a defensive war against aggressive expansionist enemies. General Marcus Kane, chairman of the newly formed Earth Defense Force, activated a holographic display showing the galaxy's current political situation. The image was staggering in its complexity, entire sectors of space color-coded to represent different factions, with violent red zones marking active battlefields. According to our alien contacts, Kane explained, his gruff military bearing lending gravity to the absurd situation. This war has been raging for 847 Earth years. The casualty figures are beyond our ability to comprehend. Entire star systems have been sterilized. Billions of sentient beings have died. The Japanese delegate raised her hand. General Kane, what exactly are they asking of us? What could Earth possibly contribute to a conflict of this magnitude? That's what's strange, Kane replied, frowning at his notes. Each faction claims they want our fresh perspective and innovative tactical thinking. They've offered to provide us with advanced technology and star Maps in exchange for human military advisors and ... Small expeditionary forces. A murmur of unease rippled through the assembly. The Brazilian delegate stood up. Small expeditionary forces? You mean they want human soldiers to fight in an alien war? Before Kane could respond, the chambers. Lights dimmed as a new figure materialized on the speaking platform. Ambassador Zixtal of the neutral mediator species stood 7 feet tall, his silver skin reflecting the chamber's lighting in patterns that seemed to shift with his emotional state. Honored representatives of Earth, Zixtal began, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. I come before you not as an advocate for any faction, but as an observer who has witnessed the devastating toll of this conflict. The three great powers are locked in absolute stalemate. Traditional warfare has proven insufficient to achieve victory for any side. President Vasquez studied the alien ambassador carefully. What aren't you telling us, Ambassador? Why would advanced galactic civilizations need help from a species that can barely travel to its nearest star? Zixtal's silver features shifted in what might have been resignation. Because, President Vasquez, sometimes the most sophisticated solutions are defeated by the simplest approaches. Your species possesses something that the great powers have. Lost through millennia of advancement, the ability to think outside established paradigms. General Kane leaned forward. You're saying they want us because we're primitive? I am saying they want you because you are unpredictable, Zixtal corrected. Each galactic power has developed warfare into a precise science. Their strategies can be calculated, their responses predicted, their tactics countered. But humans ... Humans operate according to principles that advanced civilizations find incomprehensible. The chamber fell silent as the implication sank in. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Maria Santos, finally spoke. Ambassador Zixtal, in your opinion, what would happen if we refused these requests? The war would continue indefinitely, he replied without hesitation. More worlds would burn. More civilizations would fall. Eventually, the conflict would expand to encompass this entire region of space, including Earth. And if we accept? Zixtal's skin shifted to deeper silver tones. That remains to be seen. But I will tell you this. In my 3 centuries of diplomatic service, I have never seen the great powers so desperate for a new variable in their calculations. President Vasquez looked around the chamber, seeing the fear and uncertainty in every face. Humanity had dreamed of first contact for generations, but not like this. Not as a last resort for civilizations tearing themselves apart. The chair recognizes the delegate from the United States, she announced. Madam President, the U.S. delegate said, standing slowly, I move that we accept these alliance requests, but with conditions. We provide military consultation and limited expeditionary forces, but we maintain the right to withdraw at any time. And we demand full disclosure of the strategic situation. Seconded, called the delegate from the European Federation. As the vote was called, each delegate faced the same impossible choice: remain safe and isolated while the galaxy burned around them, or step into a conflict that could destroy humanity entirely. The final tally was closer than anyone had expected. 147 votes in favor, 146 opposed. By a single vote, humanity entered a galactic war. None of the delegates could have imagined that within months. That single vote would determine the fate of every sentient species in the galaxy. The Joint Alien Observation Facility orbiting Earth's moon hummed with activity as scientific assessment teams from all 3 factions compiled their analysis of humanity's military capabilities. The circular chamber was divided into 3 sections, each representing one of the major powers. But for once their rivalry was set aside in favor of shared bewilderment. Dr. Vexillion of the Saurian Science Directorate studied the holographic displays showing human military exercises, his scaled features twisted in confusion. I have reviewed these tactical simulations 17 times, and I still cannot comprehend this strategic logic. His crystalline counterpart, Research Matrix Crystal, flickered through several processing states before responding. The mathematical inefficiencies are staggering. They deploy forces and patterns that violate basic principles of battlefield geometry. Observe this engagement, added Hive analyst Zakth, projecting a recording of human forces conducting urban warfare training. They split their units into small groups that operate independently. No central coordination, no unified command structure. By all tactical logic, they should be easily defeated. Dr. Vexillion manipulated the display to show human equipment specifications. Their weapons are equally primitive. Kinetic projectiles accelerated by chemical explosions. No energy weapons, no plasma charges, no molecular disruptors. They literally throw pieces of metal at their enemies. The metallurgy is surprisingly sophisticated, Crystal observed, but the concept remains fundamentally crude. Their most advanced armor is layered ceramic and polymer composites, materials we abandoned millennia ago. Yet somehow, Zakth noted with growing frustration, they achieve battlefield effectiveness ratios that approach our own standards. This should not be mathematically possible. The three scientists fell silent as they contemplated the implications. By every metric they understood, human military forces should be little more than an organized rabble. Yet the combat recording showed something that defied their analysis. Dr. Vexillion activated another display. Perhaps the answer lies in their physiological limitations. Note the restrictions imposed by their biological form. They require constant atmospheric support, have limited sensory range, possess inferior strength and reflexes compared to any of our species. These limitations should make them ineffective as soldiers, Crystal agreed, yet observe how they compensate. The display showed human soldiers using tools, environmental features, and coordinated tactics to overcome superior enemy forces in simulation after simulation. They adapt, Zakth realized, his compound eyes widening. Not through technological advancement or biological evolution, but through behavioral modification. They change their methods based on immediate circumstances. Impossible, Dr. Vexillion protested. Effective military doctrine requires standardized procedures, predictable outcomes, mathematical certainty. You cannot simply adapt your way to victory. And yet, Crystal observed, that appears to be exactly what they do. The scientists spent the next several hours reviewing data on human cultural development, finding pattern after pattern of the same inexplicable phenomenon. Humans faced overwhelming challenges not by developing superior technology or evolving enhanced capabilities, but by finding new ways to use existing resources. Their entire species appears to be built around this concept, Zakth concluded. They call it innovation, the practice of discovering new applications for known principles. It is highly inefficient, Dr. Vexillion declared. Far better to perfect existing methods than to constantly experiment with unproven alternatives. Perhaps, Crystal said thoughtfully, but consider this, our warfare has become so refined, so perfected, that each side can predict and counter every possible strategic approach. What if this human inefficiency is actually an advantage? You're suggesting that their primitive approach might succeed where our advanced methods have failed? I am suggesting that their inability to wage war correctly might make them unpredictable enough to break the stalemate we have endured for centuries. The three scientists exchanged uncertain glances. The possibility was simultaneously fascinating and terrifying. What if the solution to their impossible war lay not in greater sophistication, but in embracing the chaotic unpredictability of a species too primitive to understand proper military doctrine? There is only one way to test this hypothesis, Dr. Vexillian said finally. We must observe human forces in actual combat conditions. Agreed, Crystal replied, but under carefully controlled circumstances. If they prove as ineffective as their technology suggests, we will have lost nothing more than expendable assets. And if they prove effective? Zakth asked. The three scientists fell silent, each contemplating a possibility that challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare. Then, Dr. Vexillian said quietly, we may have to reconsider our understanding of what it means to be advanced. The training facility on asteroid base Omega-7 had been hastily constructed to accommodate the unprecedented cooperation between three galactic powers and their new human allies. The massive structure carved into the asteroid's core buzzed with activity as soldiers from 4 different species attempted to learn to work together. Colonel Sarah Mitchell of the Human Marine Corps stood in the central training bay, her dress, uniform looking almost comically primitive next to the advanced battle gear worn by her alien counterparts. At 42, she was a veteran of Earth's various regional conflicts, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for this. Colonel Mitchell, rumbled Training Commander Vexion, his massive saurian frame towering over her despite the asteroid's reduced gravity. Your forces have now failed 13 consecutive tactical simulations. This performance is ... concerning. Mitchell met his golden reptilian gaze without flinching. With respect, Commander, we're still learning to use your equipment. These energy weapons don't operate like anything we're familiar with. The plasma rifle is a simple point-and-fire weapon, Vexion replied with barely concealed exasperation. You aim, you squeeze the trigger, the target is eliminated. How can beings intelligent enough to achieve spaceflight struggle with such elementary concepts? Behind them, a group of human soldiers were attempting to coordinate with crystalline warriors in a simulated urban assault. The exercise was not going well. The humans kept breaking formation to check corners and clear buildings individually, while their alien partners maintained rigid geometric patterns that left massive gaps in their defensive coverage. Sergeant Morrison, Mitchell called out. What's your situation? Ma'am, these crystal folks want to advance in perfect straight lines, Morrison replied, frustration evident in his voice. But the enemy's got crossfire positions set up. We need to bound from cover to cover, but they won't break formation. The crystalline squad leader, designated Alpha 7, flickered with annoyance. Human Morrison, optimal battlefield movement follows calculated trajectories based on energy efficiency and exposure minimization. Your random scurrying serves no logical purpose. Random scurrying? Morrison laughed bitterly. Alpha 7, those energy positions will cut you to pieces if you advance in straight lines. You need to use the terrain, move unpredictably, keep the enemy guessing. The enemy's targeting algorithms are based on logical movement patterns, Alpha 7 replied. If we maintain optimal formation, their hit probability decreases to acceptable parameters. Mitchell watched the argument escalate and felt a familiar headache building behind her eyes. This was the 14th training exercise that had devolved into cultural misunderstanding. Stand down, both of you, she ordered. Alpha 7, your formation tactics work well in open terrain with clear sight lines. Morrison, their energy weapons have ranges and capabilities our doctrine wasn't designed for. We need to find a middle ground. Training Commander Vexion approached, his clawed feet clicking against the metal deck plating. Colonel, perhaps it would be beneficial to separate human forces into support roles rather than direct combat operations. Your species clearly lacks the tactical sophistication for modern warfare. Mitchell's jaw clenched, but she maintained her professional composure. Commander, what was the primary objective of this exercise? Neutralize enemy positions while minimizing friendly casualties. And did we complete that objective? Vexion checked his tactical display, frowning. Yes, but your methods were highly inefficient. Acceptable losses should have been 15%. Your chaotic approach resulted in 37% casualties. But we completed the mission, Mitchell pressed. Our wounded can be treated and returned to duty. The enemy positions were eliminated. The objective was achieved. Success achieved through inefficient means is not true success, Vexion replied. Proper military doctrine minimizes variables and maximizes predictable outcomes. Mitchell bit back her first 3 responses, all of which would have been spectacularly insubordinate. Instead, she turned to watch another training exercise where human engineers were working with insectoid technicians to establish a forward operating base. The insectoids had calculated the optimal construction pattern, a perfectly symmetrical base layout that maximized defensive capabilities while minimizing resource expenditure. The humans kept suggesting modifications that violated the mathematical perfection but took advantage of local terrain features. "Ma'am," called Private Chun from the engineering group, "the bugs want to put the command post on the high ground, in the center of the base. But that makes it a perfect target for artillery. If we move it to that depression over there and use the hill as a natural shield." "The calculations do not support terrain-based modifications," chittered Sub-Commander. Clack-tack. "Optimal positioning follows mathematical models, not geological accidents." "But sir," Chun persisted, "in Afghanistan we learned that." Private Chun. Mitchell interrupted. "What did you learn in Afghanistan?" Chun straightened. "That the enemy doesn't care about your mathematical models, ma'am. They care about what works. And what works is using every advantage you can find, even if it doesn't look pretty on paper." Sub-Commander Clack-tack's antenna twitched with agitation. "Combat is a science, not an art. Variables must be controlled, outcomes predicted, efficiency maximized." "With respect, sir," Chun replied, "combat is about winning. Everything else is just theory." Mitchell felt something click into place in her mind. She'd been approaching this training all wrong, trying to fit human methods into alien frameworks instead of recognizing that both approaches had value. "Commander Vexion," she said slowly, "what if we're asking the wrong questions? Explain. You're trying to teach us to fight like you do. We're trying to adapt our methods to your technology. But what if the goal isn't to make us fight like aliens, but to use our different approach as an advantage?" Vexion's golden eyes narrowed. "Human tactics are demonstrably inferior by every measurable standard, are they?" Mitchell gestured to the tactical display. "Your warfare has been locked in stalemate for 8 centuries. Every time one side develops a new tactic, the others adapt and counter it. But what if we brought approaches that couldn't be easily countered because they don't follow the rules you're all used to?" The training commander was quiet for a long moment, studying the data from their exercises. "You are suggesting that your tactical incompetence might be strategically valuable? I'm suggesting that our tactical flexibility might be exactly what this war needs." As if to emphasize her point, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Emergency lights bathed the training bay in red as urgent announcements echoed from fog. The communication systems. All personnel to battle stations. This is not a drill. Enemy forces have broken through the Kepler 452 defensive line. All available units prepare for immediate deployment. Mitchell and Vexion exchanged glances. Theory was about to meet reality. "Colonel," Vexion said grimly, "it appears we are about to test your hypothesis under actual combat conditions." As human and alien forces scrambled to prepare for their first joint operation, none of them could have predicted that the failed training exercises were about to become the foundation for a military revolution that would reshape galactic warfare forever. The Kepler 452 system had been a strategic prize for over 3 centuries, its location controlling a crucial hyperspace junction that allowed rapid movement between 7 different sectors. The star system itself was unremarkable, a yellow dwarf star with 4 rocky planets and an extensive asteroid belt, but its position made it the key to controlling trade and military movement across an entire region of space. Now it was about to become the testing ground for humanity's first major contribution to galactic warfare. Admiral Zethrak stood on the command deck of his flagship Predator's Vengeance, studying the tactical displays with growing frustration. The insectoid hive forces had established themselves on the system's 3rd planet, using their typical geometric fortification patterns to create an almost impregnable defensive network. "Status report," he commanded, his scaled hide gleaming under the bridge's tactical lighting. "Orbital bombardment has proven ineffective," reported his tactical officer. "The enemy has deployed shield generators in overlapping patterns. Our energy weapons are being dispersed across multiple defensive grids. Ground assault options? Projected casualties exceed acceptable parameters. The insectoids have positioned their defensive structures to maximize crossfire coverage. Standard assault doctrines would result in 93% losses before we could establish a foothold." Zethrak's claws extended slightly, a sign of barely contained aggression that his crew had learned to recognize. 8 months we have been attempting to take this system. 8 months of perfectly executed tactical operations that accomplished nothing. "Sir," his communications officer interrupted, "we're receiving a transmission from the human vessel. Colonel Mitchell is requesting permission to land forces." "The humans?" Zethrak turned to study the small formation of human ships maintaining position at the edge of the fleet. Their vessels looked like crude metal boxes compared to the elegant Saurian warships, but they had arrived on schedule and taken their assigned position without complaint. "What can their primitive forces accomplish that our advanced assault troops cannot?" "Unknown, sir. The colonel claims her forces can neutralize the shield generators to allow for renewed orbital bombardment." Zethrak considered the options. His own forces were stalled, casualties were mounting, and high command was demanding results. The humans were expendable assets. If they failed, nothing was lost. If they somehow succeeded, grant permission, he decided. But warn them that we cannot provide fire support once they enter the atmosphere. The shield generators make precision targeting impossible. "Understood, sir." As the human landing craft detached from their ships and began their descent toward the planet's surface, Admiral Zethrak activated his personal recording system. If the humans were about to demonstrate some unexpected capability, he wanted a complete record for strategic analysis. What he recorded instead would become required study material at military academies across the galaxy for generations to come. Colonel Mitchell stood in the cramped troop bay of the human lander Semper Fi, checking her equipment one final time as they descended through Kepler 452c's atmosphere. Around her, 36 Marines prepared for what their briefings had described as a reconnaissance in force. Military terminology for go find out what we're up against. 2 minutes to touchdown, announced Lieutenant Park from the cockpit. Intel says the LZ is cold, but those shield generators are pumping out enough energy to scramble our sensors. Mitchell activated her comm system to address the landing force. Listen up, Marines. We're going in blind with equipment we've been training on for all of 6 weeks, to attack defensive positions that have stopped every assault for the past 8 months. Sounds like Tuesday, ma'am, called out Sergeant Morrison, earning chuckles from the squad. The alien advisors have given us detailed analysis of the enemy positions, Mitchell continued. Perfect geometric fire lanes, overlapping coverage patterns, mathematically optimal placement. It's exactly the kind of defensive setup our doctrine says we should never attack directly. So we're not attacking directly? Asked Corporal Williams. We're attacking chaotically, Mitchell replied with a grim smile. The insectoids have designed their defenses to counter logical assault patterns. So we're going to be as illogical as possible. The lander touched down with a jarring impact that would have been considered a crash landing by alien standards, but was just another Tuesday for Marine Corps pilots. The bay doors opened to reveal a landscape that looked like something from a military engineer's nightmare. The insectoid fortifications stretched across the horizon in perfect geometric patterns, each defensive position precisely placed to provide mutual support. Energy barriers shimmered between the structures, creating kill zones that would channel any assault force into predetermined engagement areas. It was a masterpiece of defensive engineering. It was also designed by beings who thought in terms of mathematical optimization rather than tactical improvisation. Objective Alpha is the central shield generator, Mitchell announced, pointing to a massive structure 3 kilometers away. According to our alien friends, it's impossible to approach without crossing at least 4 overlapping fire zones. What's the plan, ma'am? Morrison asked. Mitchell grinned. We don't approach it. For the next 20 minutes, human forces spread across the landscape in patterns that would have given alien tactical analysts seizures. Instead of advancing toward their objectives, they began digging in random locations. Instead of establishing clear command and control structures, they broke into small groups that operated independently. Instead of following the logical approach routes, they began moving through areas the insectoids had dismissed as impassable terrain. Contact front, Williams called out as his squad encountered the first insectoid patrol. The enemy soldiers moved in perfect formation, their chitinous armor gleaming as they advanced with mathematical precision. The firefight that followed defied every principle of galactic warfare. Instead of establishing superior firepower and advancing under cover, the humans scattered. Instead of meeting the enemy charge with organized resistance, they disappeared into terrain features the insectoids hadn't considered tactically relevant. From his command position, Mitchell watched her forces engage in what alien observers would later describe as organized chaos. Marines used chemical explosives to collapse rocky overhangs, creating improvised cover where none had existed. They employed psychological warfare, using human vocal cords to create sounds that confused insectoid communication frequencies. Adapted their equipment in real time, modifying alien energy weapons with human engineering principles. Ma'am, Morrison reported over the comm, we've got a problem. The shield generator is protected by an energy barrier that extends underground. Our explosives can't penetrate it. Can you get close enough to study it? Negative. The approach is covered by 3 defensive positions with overlapping fields of fire. Mitchell studied her tactical display, noting the positions of her scattered forces. By every standard of military doctrine, her attack was failing catastrophically. Her units were dispersed, her command structure was fragmented, and her forces were taking casualties while making no apparent progress toward their objectives, which was exactly what she wanted the enemy to think. Morrison, what's the power source for those defensive positions? Looks like they're drawing from the main shield generator, ma'am. Underground power conduits running through those rocky formations to the east. The ones that the insectoids didn't bother to fortify because they're tactically irrelevant? Those would be the ones, ma'am. Mitchell smiled. Chun, you still have those mining charges you've been experimenting with? Yes, ma'am. The ones Command said were improvised munitions of questionable tactical value? Those are exactly the ones I want. Morrison, I'm sending you Chun's position. I want you to link up with his squad and put those charges on the power conduits. But ma'am, that won't take down the shield generator. No, but it'll knock out power to the defensive positions protecting it. Williams, once Morrison cuts the power, I want your squad to advance on the generator using those impassable ravines we identified. Roger that, ma'am. As her plan unfolded, Mitchell realized that her Marines were doing something that hadn't been attempted in galactic warfare for centuries. They were improvising. Every move they made was based on immediate tactical assessment rather than predetermined doctrine. Every problem they encountered was solved through creative application of available resources rather than by following established procedures. The insectoids, with their hive mind coordination and mathematical precision, found themselves facing an enemy that refused to behave predictably. Their perfect defensive calculations were useless against forces that didn't advance along logical routes. Their coordinated responses were ineffective against opponents who changed tactics every few minutes. Charges set, Chun reported. Detonating in 3.2.1. The explosion echoed across the landscape as underground power conduits ruptured, sending cascading failures through the insectoid defensive network. Energy barriers flickered and died. Automated defensive systems went offline. Perfect geometric. Fire patterns collapsed into confused overlapping zones. Move! 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 Mitchell ordered, and her Marines poured through gaps in the defensive line that hadn't existed moments before. The assault on the central shield generator lasted exactly 17 minutes. Williams' squad reached the structure through approaches the insectoids had considered impossible. Chun's improvised charges proved remarkably effective against alien engineering designed to withstand conventional weapons. Morrison's tactical leadership adapted to changing circumstances faster than the insectoid defenders could coordinate responses. When the shield generator finally collapsed, Admiral Zethrak watched from orbit as his orbital bombardment crews suddenly found themselves with clear targeting solutions for the first time in 8 months. The Battle of Kepler 452 was over before most of the galactic commanders understood what had happened. But in the aftermath, as casualty reports and tactical analysis flooded through military networks across 3 galactic powers, one fact became impossible to ignore. The primitive humans had achieved in less than an hour what advanced galactic forces had failed to accomplish in 8 months. And they had done it by breaking every rule of modern warfare. The emergency session of the Galactic War Council convened aboard the neutral station Concordia, a massive structure positioned in the empty space between the 3 great powers. Territorial boundaries. The circular council chamber hummed with tension as representatives from the Saurian Empire, Crystalline Collective, and Insectoid Hive Confederation took their places around the central holographic display. The display showed tactical recordings from Kepler 452, playing and replaying the impossible human victory from multiple angles. Each viewing seemed to deepen the confusion rather than provide clarity. High Commander Zethrak activated his personal shield generator, a sign of significant agitation among Saurian leadership. In 847 years of warfare, we have never witnessed tactics like these. Admiral Velthra's crystalline form flickered through several processing states before stabilizing. The mathematical models describing their approach violate fundamental principles of tactical logic. Their success should have been statistically impossible. General Morgoth's compound eyes tracked the human movements on the display with the kind of focused attention usually reserved for studying an entirely new species. They achieved a 93% casualty reduction compared to our projected assault outcomes while completing the mission in 17% of the estimated time. How? Zethrak demanded. How did primitives accomplish what our most advanced tactical A is deemed impossible? The chamber's main doors cycled open to admit Colonel Sarah Mitchell, flanked by 2 guards but otherwise accorded the respect due a military officer. She moved to the center of the chamber with the calm confidence of someone who had been shot at by experts and survived. Colonel Mitchell, Admiral Velthra began, her harmonic voice carrying undertones of genuine curiosity. We require an explanation of your tactical methodology at Kepler 452. Mitchell studied the 3 alien commanders, noting their body language and positioning. These were beings accustomed to absolute control, to warfare conducted according to precise mathematical models. They were genuinely bewildered by what they had witnessed. With respect, Admiral, you're asking the wrong question. Explain. You want to know how we accomplished the mission. But the real question is why your forces couldn't accomplish it despite superior technology, greater numbers, and 8 months of preparation. General Morgoth's mandibles clicked with irritation. Our assault doctrine is based on proven mathematical principles. Optimal force deployment, calculated risk assessment, predetermined tactical responses. Exactly, Mitchell replied. You've been fighting the same way for 8 centuries. Every battle follows the same patterns, uses the same strategic principles, employs the same tactical solutions. You've created a war where everyone knows exactly what everyone else is going to do. High Commander Zethrak leaned forward, his golden eyes focusing intently on the human colonel. You claim our sophistication is a weakness? I claim your predictability is a vulnerability. The insectoids at Kepler 452 designed their defenses to counter standard galactic assault doctrine. They calculated optimal firing solutions based on logical approach routes. They positioned their forces to respond to predetermined tactical patterns. Mitchell gestured to the tactical display. But humans don't follow predetermined patterns. We adapt to immediate circumstances. We solve problems with whatever resources are available. We change tactics based on what works rather than what should work. Chaos is not a tactical doctrine, Admiral Velthra protested. It's not chaos, Mitchell corrected. It's flexibility. Every one of my Marines is trained to think independently, to assess situations in real time, to find solutions that might not exist in any manual. You've spent millennia perfecting warfare to the point where it's become a mathematical exercise. We still treat it as a human problem requiring human solutions. The 3 commanders exchanged glances, each recognizing the implications of what they were hearing. You're suggesting, General Morgoth said slowly, that your primitive approach is superior to our advanced methodologies? I'm suggesting that your advanced methodologies have created a stalemate that's lasted 8 centuries. Maybe it's time to try something different. High Commander Zethrak studied the tactical recordings again, focusing on the seemingly random movements of human forces. Your soldiers operated without central coordination. How did they maintain unit cohesion? They didn't, Mitchell replied. Unit cohesion is a means to an end, not an end in itself. My Marines maintained mission focus while adapting their methods to local conditions. Sometimes that meant coordinated movement. Sometimes it meant individual initiative. But without coordination, how did you achieve tactical synchronization? We didn't achieve synchronization. We achieved results. Morrison's squad identified the power conduits. Chun's team developed the appropriate charges. William's squad found the approach route. Each group solved the part of the problem they were best positioned to handle. Admiral Velthra processed this information through her quantum matrices, struggling to reconcile it with established tactical theory. Such methods should result in confusion, redundancy, and conflicting objectives. Sometimes they do, Mitchell admitted, but they also result in solutions that no single command structure could have calculated in advance. When you don't know what you're going to do next, your enemy can't predict your actions. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. These three galactic powers had spent centuries perfecting their military doctrines to the point where each side could accurately predict the other's responses. The war had become an elaborate chess game where every possible move had been calculated in advance. Humanity had just demonstrated a completely different approach, one that treated warfare not as a chess game, but as an improvisation exercise. Colonel Mitchell, High Commander Zethrak said finally, "What would you require to implement these flexible, tactical approaches on a larger scale?" Mitchell felt a surge of satisfaction. "I would require command authority over joint operations, access to all available intelligence, and the freedom to employ human tactical doctrine without interference from established protocols." You want us to abandon 8 centuries of proven military science? I want you to supplement it with approaches that your enemies can't calculate in advance. Keep your advanced technology, your superior firepower, your strategic coordination, but add the element of unpredictability that only human forces can provide. General Morgoth's antenna twitched as he processed data from the hive consciousness. The collective reports increasing enemy activity across 17 sectors. If your methods prove effective on a strategic scale, then we might finally break this stalemate, Admiral Velthra completed. But the risks are considerable. Abandoning proven doctrine for experimental methods. With respect, Admiral, Mitchell interrupted, your proven doctrine has produced 8 centuries of stalemate. How much worse could experimental methods possibly be? The three commanders looked at each other, each weighing the enormous risk of trusting their military fortunes to primitive humans against the mathematical certainty of continued stalemate. High Commander Zethrak spoke first. Colonel Mitchell, you will be granted provisional command authority over joint tactical operations in the Andronis sector. The Andronis sector? Mitchell's eyes widened. That's been contested territory for over 2 centuries. Precisely, Admiral Velthra agreed. If your methods can succeed there, they can succeed anywhere. If they fail, then we'll know that human tactics are insufficient for strategic scale operations. General Morgoth finished. Mitchell felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. The Andronis sector represented 17 star systems, billions of sentient beings, and some of the most heavily fortified positions in the galaxy. Success would prove that human methods could operate at strategic scale. Failure would likely result in unprecedented casualties and her own court-martial. I accept the assignment, she said without hesitation. As the council session concluded and the three powers began coordinating humanity's first strategic command, none of them could have imagined that they had just authorized the most fundamental change in galactic warfare since the invention of energy weapons. The age of predictable conflict was about to end. The age of human warfare was about to begin. The Andronis sector had been a symbol of the war's futility for longer than human civilization had possessed written language. 17 star systems arranged in a rough sphere, each containing strategic resources, established colonies, or crucial hyperspace nexus points that made them impossible to abandon, yet impossible to fully control. For 217 years, the three galactic powers had fought over these systems in an endless cycle of conquest and reconquest. Massive fleets would clash in spectacular battles. Entire worlds would change hands. Billions of resources would be expended, and within months, the strategic situation would return to exactly where it had started. It was, according to every military analyst in the galaxy, the perfect expression of the war's mathematical inevitability. Colonel Sarah Mitchell stood in the command center of the Joint Operations Base that had been hastily constructed in the system's asteroid belt, studying displays that showed more military might concentrated in one location than had ever existed in human history. The combined fleet under her nominal command included over 3,000 vessels, representing the pinnacle of three different technological paradigms. It should have been the most powerful military force ever assembled. Instead, it was a logistics nightmare waiting to happen. Status report, she called to her senior staff, a mixture of human officers and alien tactical specialists who were still learning to work together. Fleet coordination is proving challenging, reported her Saurian liaison, Commander Kissathar. Each faction's vessels operate on different communication protocols, use incompatible tactical displays, and follow contradictory rules of engagement. The mathematical integration algorithms are insufficient, added tactical matrix Prism of the crystalline forces. Optimal fleet positioning requires standardized operational parameters that do not currently exist. The Hive components report readiness, chittered Sub-Commander Vexclick, but our coordination protocols assume unified command consciousness. Independent decision-making by individual unit commanders creates unacceptable variables. Mitchell nodded grimly. She had expected this problem. Each alien military had evolved to operate within its own cultural and technological framework. Combining them should have created an unstoppable force, but instead had produced a massive fleet that could barely coordinate basic maneuvers. Major Williams, she called to her human intelligence officer, what's our latest assessment of enemy positions? Major Williams activated a holographic display showing the Andronus sector's current strategic situation. Ma'am, the enemy has had 2 centuries to fortify these positions. They've established overlapping defensive networks that can mutual support across multiple star systems. Any conventional assault would require sequential reduction of fortified positions, giving them time to redistribute forces and resources. Estimated casualties for conventional approach? 60 to 75% losses before we could establish control of even one system. The alien officers shifted uncomfortably. These casualty projections were why the Andronus sector had remained contested for so long. The cost of victory exceeded any reasonable strategic benefit. What about unconventional approaches? Mitchell asked. Ma'am, every unconventional approach has been attempted multiple times over the past 2 centuries. The enemy has prepared counters for asymmetric warfare, simultaneous multi-vector assault, siege tactics, infiltration operations, and economic warfare. Mitchell studied the tactical displays, noting the perfect geometric precision of the enemy. Defensive arrangements. Like the insectoids at Kepler 452, they had optimized their positions to counter every known form of galactic warfare, which meant it was time to try some forms of warfare that weren't known. Major Park, she called to her operations officer, I want you to run a simulation. Instead of attacking the fortified positions, what would happen if we ignored them entirely? The alien officers exchanged confused glances. Commander Kissathar spoke first. Colonel, the fortified positions control all strategic resources in the sector. Ignoring them accomplishes nothing, does it? Mitchell brought up a different display showing economic and supply data for the region. These fortifications require constant resupply, food, ammunition, fuel, replacement parts. Where do those supplies come from? Major Park's fingers danced over his console as he traced supply lines throughout the sector. Ma'am, The logistics network is extensive. Supply convoys, automated freight haulers, resource extraction operations, all undefended, Mitchell observed. Because everyone knows you attack the fortifications, not the supply lines. Supply line interdiction is a recognized tactical approach. Tactical Matrix Prism protested. Enemy forces will simply adapt their logistics networks to compensate, will they? Mitchell smiled. Major Williams, how long would it take to adapt their logistics networks if we attacked all of them simultaneously across all 17 systems? Williams ran rapid calculations. Ma'am, if we could coordinate simultaneous strikes, they'd need
weeks to establish alternate supply routes.
But the coordination requirements would be enormous. What if we didn't coordinate? The room fell silent. Every officer present, human and alien alike, stared at Mitchell as if she had suggested abandoning the concepts of physics. Ma'am, Major Park said carefully, uncoordinated attacks would result in massive redundancy, conflicting objectives, and tactical chaos. Exactly, Mitchell replied. Sub-Commander Vexclick, your hive forces operate through perfect coordination. The enemy's defensive calculations are based on that assumption. But what if we gave each ship group independent targeting authority and let them engage whatever targets of opportunity they found? The inefficiency would be staggering, Vexclick protested. But the unpredictability would be total, Mitchell countered. Commander Kissathar, your Saurian hunters operate through individual initiative within general parameters. What if we applied that approach to fleet operations? It would violate every principle of coordinated warfare, Kissathar replied, though his tone suggested he was beginning to see the possibilities. Tactical Matrix Prism, your crystalline forces can process battlefield information faster than any other military in the galaxy. What if we use that processing power not to coordinate attacks, but to maximize chaos? To maximize chaos? Prism's form flickered through several computational states. You want us to use our advanced capabilities to create disorder? I want you to use your advanced capabilities to create situations the enemy cannot predict or counter, Mitchell clarified. Instead of perfect coordination, we deploy organized confusion. Instead of following established patterns, we create new patterns faster than they can be analyzed. The alien officers spent several minutes processing this concept while the human staff watched with barely concealed grins. They had worked with Colonel Mitchell long enough to recognize the signs of a plan that would either prove brilliant or spectacularly destructive. There is mathematical elegance to the approach, Prism admitted finally. If we could generate sufficient tactical entropy, the enemy's defensive calculations would become meaningless, Kissathar finished, but the risks are less than the certainty of failure if we continue conventional approaches, Mitchell interrupted. Major Williams, I want target packages prepared for every logistics facility, supply convoy, and support installation in the sector. Major Park, coordinate with our alien liaisons to establish independent operational zones for each fleet element. Ma'am. Major Park asked, what about overall strategic coordination? Mitchell's smile was both confident and slightly terrifying. Major, our strategic coordination will consist of telling everyone to attack everything they can find as creatively as possible. As her staff began implementing what would later be known as Operation Prometheus, Colonel Mitchell reflected on the irony of her situation. She was about to deploy the most advanced military force in galactic history using tactical principles that would have been familiar to ancient human generals who fought with bronze spears and wooden shields. The concept was elegantly simple. If you can't predict what you're going to do next, your enemy certainly can't either. Within 12 hours, The largest military operation in galactic history would begin not with coordinated precision, but with deliberately organized chaos. The enemy had spent 2 centuries preparing for every possible form of logical attack. They were about to discover what happened when logic was abandoned entirely. Operation Prometheus began at 0347 Galactic Standard Time with what would later be described as the most beautifully chaotic military deployment in recorded history across 17 star systems. Over 3,000 vessels of wildly different designs and capabilities began moving toward targets that had been selected through a combination of strategic analysis and random number generation. Saurian hunter-killers stalked automated supply convoys like massive predators. Crystalline formation fighters split into individual units that attacked with mathematical precision but no apparent coordination. Insectoid swarm ships dispersed into clouds of independently operating units that seemed to be everywhere at once. Admiral Kethver of the enemy hegemony forces watched the deployment from his command fortress orbiting Andronis Prime, his 4 arms working frantically to process the incoming tactical data. Analysis, he commanded his staff. What is their primary objective? Unknown, sir, replied his intelligence coordinator. They appeared to be attacking supply convoys, logistics facilities, communications relays, fuel depots, maintenance stations, and automated mining operations simultaneously across all systems. Diversionary attacks preceding main assault? Negative, sir. Fleet-level assets are being committed to these operations. These are not diversions. Admiral Kethver studied the tactical displays with growing bewilderment. In 2 centuries of commanding hegemony forces in the Andronis sector, he had faced every conceivable form of attack. Mass frontal assaults, siege warfare, infiltration, operations, economic blockades, technological warfare, all had followed predictable patterns that allowed for calculated responses. This was something entirely different. Sir, reported his tactical coordinator, the enemy fleet elements are not maintaining communication with each other. Each group appears to be operating independently. Impossible. Coordination requirements for an operation of this scale demand constant communication. Nevertheless, sir, we are detecting minimal inter-unit transmissions. Each group appears to be selecting targets and attack methods without reference to overall strategic coordination. Admiral Kethver felt a chill that had nothing to do with the command center's environmental systems. Are you telling me that 3,000 enemy vessels are attacking randomly? Not randomly, sir. Each attack appears to be tactically sound and well executed. But there is no apparent pattern linking the various operations. On the display, Admiral Kethver watched as his carefully constructed defensive network began to unravel in ways that violated every principle of military science he understood. Supply convoys that had operated safely for decades were being intercepted by forces that seemed to appear from nowhere. Communications networks that had been hardened against conventional assault were failing under attacks that exploited vulnerabilities no one had considered relevant. Deploy rapid response forces to protect priority assets, he ordered. Which assets, sir? All of them. Sir, we don't have sufficient rapid response forces to protect all assets simultaneously. Standard doctrine calls for protecting strategic priorities and accepting losses to secondary targets. Then determine their primary objectives and concentrate defenses accordingly. His staff worked frantically to identify patterns in the human-led assault, but every analysis produced contradictory results. The attacks seemed to prioritize targets based on opportunity rather than strategic value. Forces would bypass heavily defended installations to attack lightly defended facilities of minimal importance, then suddenly concentrate overwhelming firepower against strategically crucial targets. Sir, his communications coordinator reported, We're receiving distress calls from 14 different systems. Logistics networks are failing, supply convoys are being decimated, and defensive positions are reporting ammunition shortages. How is that possible? We have supply reserves sufficient for 6 months of conventional warfare. The enemy isn't attacking our stockpiles, sir. They're attacking our distribution networks. Supply depots are intact, but we can't get supplies to the positions that need them. Admiral Kethfer realized with growing horror that his enemy had discovered something that 2 centuries of conventional warfare had missed. You don't need to destroy your enemy's resources if you can prevent them from using those resources effectively. Emergency conference with sector commanders, he ordered. All defensive positions are to implement autonomous supply protocols immediately. But as his orders went out across the sector's communication networks, Admiral Kethfor discovered that the human-led forces had been busy with more than supply line interdiction. Communications relays that had operated reliably for decades were transmitting garbled messages. Navigation beacons were broadcasting incorrect coordinates. Even quantum encrypted channels were producing nonsensical data. Sir, his communications coordinator reported with barely concealed panic, our communication network is compromised. We can't coordinate defensive responses across multiple systems. On his tactical display, Admiral Kethfer watched as the perfect geometric precision of his defensive network began to collapse into isolation and confusion. Each fortified position was operating independently, unable to coordinate with its neighbors, forced to make decisions based on incomplete information about rapidly changing tactical situations. It was exactly what the human commanders had intended. Aboard the command vessel Determination, Colonel Mitchell monitored the progress of Operation Prometheus with satisfaction mixed with professional anxiety. The operation was succeeding beyond her most optimistic projections, but she knew that the enemy would eventually adapt to their tactics. Status report, she called to her operations center. Ma'am, all fleet elements are reporting successful. Engagement of primary targets, Major Park replied. Supply line interdiction is approaching 93% effectiveness across all systems. Enemy response? Confused and fragmented. They're attempting to coordinate defensive responses, but their communication networks are severely degraded. Casualty reports? Remarkably light, ma'am. By avoiding direct engagement with fortified positions, we've achieved tactical surprise in most encounters. Enemy forces are responding to threats they weren't prepared to face. Mitchell nodded grimly. The light casualties were crucial to the operation's success. Traditional assaults on the Androna sector had failed not just because of strategic ineffectiveness, but because the human cost made victory Pyrrhic even when achieved. Commander Kisithar, she called to her Saurian liaison, how are your hunter groups performing? Beyond expectations, Colonel, the massive reptilian replied, his golden eyes gleaming with predatory satisfaction. Independent operations allow my captains to employ instinctive tactics that coordinated battle plans suppress. We are remembering what it means to hunt. Tactical matrix prism status of crystalline operations? Fascinating, Colonel. The energy. Being replied, its form flickering with what might have been excitement. Abandoning coordination requirements has allowed each unit to optimize its performance for local conditions. Mathematical efficiency has actually increased despite the absence of systematic planning. Sub-Commander Vexclick, how is the Hive adapting to independent operations? Initially challenging, the insectoid admitted, mandibles clicking rapidly. However, individual commanders are developing tactical autonomy that enhances overall effectiveness. The collective consciousness remains connected, but decision-making has become distributed rather than centralized. Mitchell felt a surge of satisfaction. Her alien counterparts were not just adapting to human tactical principles. They were discovering advantages in their own military traditions that centuries of advanced warfare had obscured. "Major Williams," she called to her intelligence officer, "enemy adaptation analysis?" "Ma'am, they're trying to respond using conventional counterinsurgency doctrine, but the scale and scope of our operations exceeds their ability to coordinate effective responses. They're essentially fighting 17 separate wars simultaneously. Without the communication infrastructure to coordinate strategy, time to enemy strategic adaptation? Unknown, ma'am. This is outside the parameters of anything they've faced before." Mitchell studied the tactical displays, watching as her forces continued their seemingly chaotic but actually carefully orchestrated assault on the enemy's logistical foundation. The operation was succeeding, but she knew they had a limited window before the enemy developed effective countermeasures. "All units," she announced over the fleet communication network, "implement Phase 2 of Operation Prometheus. Begin coordination between adjacent operational zones while maintaining tactical autonomy." What followed would later be studied in military academies as a masterclass in adaptive warfare. Human commanders began sharing information and resources between their operational zones, but without establishing rigid command hierarchies. Successful tactics discovered by one unit were rapidly shared with others, but each commander remained free to adapt those tactics to local conditions. The result was something that had never existed in galactic warfare, a military force that combined the peace advantages of centralized coordination with the flexibility of independent operation. "Ma'am," Major Park reported, "we're receiving surrender. Offers from enemy positions in 7 systems. Surrender offers?" "Yes, ma'am." Apparently, several enemy commanders have concluded that continued resistance is futile given their complete loss of logistical support. Mitchell felt a moment of disbelief. They had been fighting for less than 18 hours and already enemy positions were surrendering? "Confirmation of surrender authenticity? Verified, ma'am. Enemy forces are offering to stand down in exchange for guaranteed treatment of personnel and non-combatants. Accept the surrenders and establish occupation protocols," Mitchell ordered, "but maintain operational security. I want the remaining enemy positions to discover their colleagues' surrender through their own reconnaissance." As reports continued to flow in from across the 17-system battlefield, Mitchell realized that Operation Prometheus had achieved something unprecedented in galactic warfare: strategic victory through tactical flexibility rather than superior firepower. But more importantly, it had demonstrated that the 8th-century stalemate could be broken not through better technology or larger fleets, but through better thinking, the enemy fortress network that had resisted conventional assault for 2 centuries was crumbling not because it had been overpowered, but because it had been outhought by commanders who refused to accept the limitations of traditional warfare. Within 48 hours, the last enemy positions in the Andromeda sector would surrender unconditionally. The most contested region in galactic space would be under unified control for the first time in over 2 centuries, and every military commander in the galaxy would be forced to confront the reality that warfare itself had fundamentally changed. The final surrender ceremony took place aboard the captured enemy flagship Hegemon's Pride, orbiting the central world of Andronis Prime. Admiral Kethfor stood in the vessel's command center, his 4 arms hanging limp at his sides as he faced Colonel Mitchell and the assembled representatives of the Allied forces. "I formally surrender all hegemony forces in the Andronis sector to the Allied command," he said, his voice carrying the hollow tone of complete defeat. "All installations, vessels, and personnel are placed under your authority." Colonel Mitchell accepted the surrender with the same professional composure she had maintained throughout the campaign. "Admiral Kethfor, Your forces will be treated according to established protocols for prisoners of war. Non-combatant populations will receive full protection and humanitarian support. Colonel, Admiral Kethfer said quietly, I must ask ... How? How what, Admiral? How did you accomplish in 2 days what we believed impossible for 2 centuries? My forces were not defeated by superior technology or overwhelming numbers. We were ... out-maneuvered ... by tactics that should not exist. Mitchell studied the defeated enemy commander, recognizing in his expression the same bewilderment she had seen in her alien allies when they first encountered human methods. Admiral, for 8 centuries your forces have fought according to mathematical models that predict optimal outcomes based on logical strategic principles. You've perfected warfare to the point where every possible move has been calculated in advance. Yes, Admiral Kethfer agreed. Precision, predictability, and mathematical optimization. These are the foundations of effective military science. But what happens when your enemy refuses to be predictable? Admiral Kethfer was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. You're saying that your tactical chaos was deliberate? Our tactical flexibility was deliberate, Mitchell corrected. Every operation was carefully planned, but the planning focused on achieving objectives rather than following predetermined methods. When circumstances changed, we changed with them. But the inefficiencies ... were less important than the effectiveness. Admiral, your defenses were designed to counter logical attacks following predictable patterns. When we attacked illogically, using unpredictable patterns, your defensive calculations became irrelevant. Admiral Kethver looked around the command center where his carefully orchestrated defensive strategy had unraveled in less than 48 hours. You're saying that our sophistication was our weakness? I'm saying that your predictability was your vulnerability. The same mathematical precision that made your forces so effective in conventional warfare made them unable to adapt when the rules of engagement changed. The implications hung in the air like an unexploded ordnance. If human tactics could defeat forces that had resisted conventional assault for centuries, what did that mean for the rest of the galactic war? Colonel Mitchell, Admiral Kethfer, said slowly, your species is going to change everything, isn't it? Before Mitchell could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the captured vessel. Priority communications flooded in from across the galaxy as news of the Andronis victory spread through military networks. Major Park approached with an expression of barely contained excitement. Ma'am, we're receiving communications from all 3 Allied high commands. They're requesting immediate strategic conferences. What's the nature of their requests? Ma'am, they want to know if our tactics can be applied to other theaters of operation. Mitchell felt the weight of galactic history settling on her shoulders. The Battle of Andronis had been intended as a test of human tactical methods. Instead, it had become proof that the entire 8th century war could be approached differently. Major, tell High Command that human tactical advisors are available for strategic consultation. But make it clear that our methods require operational autonomy to be effective. Yes, ma'am. As the command center bustled with activity around the coordination of the galaxy's first unified strategic planning session in centuries, Colonel Mitchell realized that humanity had just crossed a threshold from which there was no return. They were no longer the primitive species, seeking acceptance from advanced galactic powers. They had become the strategic advisors whose methods would determine the future of galactic civilization. The war that had consumed the galaxy for 8 centuries was about to enter its final phase, and it would be won not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the uniquely human ability to think outside the constraints of established doctrine. 6 months after the Andronis victory, The transformed nature of galactic warfare had become apparent to every military commander in known space. The emergency session of the combined Allied High Command convened aboard the massive space station Unity, constructed specifically to house the unprecedented cooperation between species that had been enemies for nearly a millennium. Fleet Admiral Sarah Chun, recently promoted from her colonel's rank, stood before the assembled commanders representing not just the 3 original Allied powers, but 17 additional species that had joined the alliance as news of human tactical innovation spread across the galaxy. "Ladies, gentlemen, and esteemed colleagues," Admiral Chun began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. 6 months ago, the Andronis sector was considered impossible to capture through conventional means. Today, it serves as the staging ground for operations that would have been inconceivable under traditional warfare doctrine. The holographic display behind her showed a real-time strategic map of the galaxy. Where once there had been clearly defined territorial boundaries maintained through centuries of stalemate, now there were flowing, dynamic front lines that shifted daily as human-led forces applied adaptive tactics across dozens of theaters of operation. High Commander Zethrak spoke first, his massive saurian frame somehow conveying both respect and amazement. "Admiral Chun, the transformation has exceeded our most optimistic projections. Enemy forces that had maintained defensive positions for decades are abandoning them rather than face adaptive assault tactics. The psychological impact has been as significant as the tactical advantages," agreed Admiral Velthra, her crystalline form shifting through computational states as she processed battlefield data in real time. "Enemy commanders report that the unpredictability of human-led operations has created decision paralysis in their command structures." General Morgoth clicked his mandibles in agreement. The Hive Collective has analyzed over 3,000 separate engagements. In each case, human tactical doctrine achieved strategic objectives with significantly reduced casualties compared to conventional approaches. Admiral Chun nodded, feeling both pride and the enormous weight of responsibility that came with revolutionizing galactic warfare. "The success has been remarkable, but we need to address the long-term implications. What we've done isn't just tactical innovation. We fundamentally changed how warfare itself is conducted." She gestured to the display, highlighting regions where traditional military doctrine had been completely abandoned in favor of adaptive approaches. "Our enemies are beginning to adapt. They're trying to incorporate unpredictability into their own tactical planning. With limited success," observed Commander Tarsith of the Valyrian Confederacy, one of the newer members of the expanding alliance. "Their mathematical approach to randomness lacks the intuitive flexibility that human commanders demonstrate naturally." "Which brings us to the critical question," Admiral Chun continued. "How do we maintain our tactical advantages while scaling our operations to end this war permanently?" The chamber fell silent as the assembled commanders contemplated the enormity of the task ahead. The human-led alliance had proven that the 8th century stalemate could be broken, but achieving final victory would require coordinating military operations across an entire galaxy while maintaining the flexibility that made their tactics effective. "Answer," Admiral Chun announced, "is Operation Endgame." A new holographic display materialized, showing what appeared to be the most complex military operation in galactic history. Hundreds of independent fleet elements, thousands of individual task forces, and millions of specialized units spread across the known galaxy. "We're going to attack everything, everywhere, all at once," Admiral Chun explained. "Not through centralized coordination, but through distributed initiative. Every commander will receive strategic objectives, but will have complete tactical autonomy in achieving those objectives." High Commander Zethrak leaned forward, his predatory instincts engaged. "Admiral, The scope of this operation exceeds anything ever attempted. The coordination requirements alone will be minimal, Admiral Chun interrupted. That's the point. Instead of trying to coordinate millions of individual actions, we're going to create conditions where coordination becomes unnecessary. She expanded the display to show communication networks and supply lines that linked enemy forces across the galaxy. The enemy's strength comes from their ability to coordinate responses across multiple theaters. But that coordination depends on communication networks, supply lines, and command structures that span galactic distances. Admiral Velthra's form flickered as she processed the implications. You're planning to attack their coordination infrastructure rather than their military forces. Exactly. If we can disrupt their ability to coordinate responses, their individual positions become isolated and vulnerable to local superior force. General Morgoth's compound eyes tracked the projected attack vectors. The simultaneous coordination requirements would be staggering for conventional forces. Which is why we're not using conventional coordination, Admiral Chun replied. Every unit will begin operations simultaneously based on local time zones rather than galactic coordination. No central timing, no synchronized communications, no coordinated targeting. Organized chaos on a galactic scale, Commander Tarsith observed. It's either brilliant or catastrophically insane. It's both, Admiral Chin admitted with a grin that had become famous throughout Allied command structures. But consider the alternative. Conventional approaches to ending this war would require decades of systematic conquest and result in casualties that could depopulate entire star systems. She gestured to casualty projections from traditional warfare models. Our adaptive tactics have already reduced typical engagement casualties by an average of 73%. Applied to a galactic-scale operation, Operation Endgame could end the war with total casualties lower than a single traditional major battle. The chamber buzzed with urgent conversations as commanders consulted with their staffs and ran preliminary calculations through their respective tactical analysis systems. High Commander Zethrak was the first to speak. Admiral Chun, the Saurian. Empire commits its full military resources to Operation Endgame. The Crystalline Collective concurs, Admiral Velthra added. Mathematical analysis indicates that while the plan violates conventional strategic doctrine, the probability of success exceeds that of any alternative approach. The Hive Confederation pledges its forces, General Morgoth declared. The collective consciousness will coordinate timing while allowing individual commanders tactical autonomy. One by one, the representatives of 17 allied species committed their military forces to the most ambitious operation in galactic history. As the planning session continued into the galactic night cycle, Admiral Chen reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. Less than a year ago, humanity had been dismissed as primitive and hopeless. Now, they were leading a galactic alliance in an operation that would determine the fate of every sentient species in known space. The war that had raged for 8 centuries was about to end, not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the uniquely human understanding that sometimes the most sophisticated solution is the willingness to abandon sophistication entirely. Operation Endgame would begin in 72 hours. The galaxy would never be the same. Operation Endgame commenced at precisely 000 hours local time across every inhabited system in the galaxy, which meant that at any given moment, the operation was beginning somewhere new as time zones rotated around the galactic core. Admiral Sarah Chun stood in the command center of the UES Determination, now serving as the flagship for the largest military operation in recorded history. Around her, Displays showed the real-time status of over 50,000 independent task forces spread across every contested region of known space. "Status report," she called to her operations center. "Ma'am, initial deployments are proceeding according to plan," Major Park replied, his voice carrying a mixture of excitement and professional concern. "Task forces are engaging targets of opportunity across all theaters simultaneously. Enemy response? Confused and fragmented as expected. They're attempting to coordinate defensive responses, but the scale and scope of simultaneous operations is exceeding their command and control capabilities." On the main display, Admiral Chun watched as her carefully orchestrated chaos unfolded. Across the galaxy, Saurian hunter groups were stalking communication relay stations with predatory efficiency. Crystalline formations were systematically dismantling supply networks with mathematical precision. Insectoid swarms were overwhelming isolated positions through sheer, overwhelming numbers applied at exactly the right moments, and throughout it all, human commanders were doing what they did best: adapting, improvising, and finding solutions that no strategic doctrine had ever contemplated. "Admiral," called Commander Kissathar from his tactical station, "my hunting groups report successful interdiction of enemy command and control networks in the Rigel sector. Enemy forces are operating independently without strategic coordination." "Confirmed." Added tactical matrix Prism. "Communication disruption has reached 73% across all monitored regions. Enemy defensive responses are becoming increasingly localized. The Hive reports successful penetration of enemy logistics networks," Sub-Commander Vexclick announced. "Supply line interdiction approaching 91% effectiveness galactic-wide." Admiral Chun felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with profound responsibility. Operation Endgame was succeeding beyond their most optimistic projections, but the scope of the operation meant that millions of sentient beings across the galaxy were depending on her tactical decisions. "Priority communication from Sector 7, Major Park announced. "Task Force Barbarian requests permission to deviate from assigned objectives." "Nature of requested deviation?" "Ma'am, they've identified an opportunity to capture an enemy strategic command center, but it would require abandoning their original mission to disrupt communications in that sector." Admiral Chun smiled. This was exactly the kind of situation that conventional military doctrine struggled with. An unexpected opportunity that couldn't have been planned in advance, but could significantly impact strategic outcomes. "Tell Task Force Barbarian they are authorized to pursue targets of opportunity using their best tactical judgment," she replied, "and forward their tactical approach to other task forces in similar situations." This was the essence of human warfare doctrine, the willingness to abandon predetermined plans in favor of better opportunities that arose during execution. It was a concept that had proven almost impossible for alien military traditions to truly embrace, despite their recognition of its effectiveness. "Admiral," Major Williams called from the intelligence station, "we're receiving surrender communications from enemy forces in 14 sectors. They're requesting terms for cessation of hostilities." 14 sectors? Admiral Chun felt a moment of disbelief. The operation had been running for less than 6 hours, and already enemy forces were seeking surrender terms? "Confirmed, ma'am." Enemy commanders report that continued resistance is futile given the complete breakdown of strategic coordination and logistical support. "Any indication of deception or tactical delay?" "Negative, ma'am." "Intelligence analysis suggests genuine surrender offers based on realistic assessment of strategic situation." Admiral Chun studied the galactic tactical display, watching as more and more enemy positions shifted from red, hostile, to yellow, neutral, to green, surrendered. The cascade effect was accelerating as isolated enemy commanders realized that continued resistance without strategic support was tactically impossible. Accept all genuine surrender offers, she ordered. Establish occupation protocols and begin integration of surrendering forces into provisional governance structures. As the hours passed, the scope of Operation Endgame's success became clear. The enemy's carefully constructed galactic command structure was collapsing not through military defeat, but through organizational chaos. Cut off from central coordination, individual commanders were making rational decisions to preserve their forces and populations, rather than sacrifice them for strategic objectives they could no longer achieve. "Ma'am," Major Park reported, "we're receiving communication from the enemy's Supreme Command Authority." Supreme Command Authority? Admiral Chun raised an eyebrow. "That's their highest level of military leadership." "Yes, ma'am." "They're requesting immediate ceasefire negotiations." The command center fell silent. The enemy's request for ceasefire negotiations meant that Operation Endgame had achieved in less than 12 hours what centuries of conventional warfare had failed to accomplish. "Put them through," Admiral Chun ordered. The main display shifted to show the image of Marshal Vex Torin, Supreme Commander of the Hegemony Forces. The four-armed alien's expression conveyed a mixture of respect and resignation that Admiral Chun had learned to recognize in defeated opponents. "Admiral Chun," Marshal Vex Torin began, "I am authorized by the Supreme Hegemony Council to negotiate terms for the cessation of hostilities across all theaters of operation. Marshal, I'm prepared to discuss ceasefire terms, but I need to make something clear. This isn't a temporary cessation of hostilities. We're talking about permanent end to this war." "Understood, Admiral." The hegemony acknowledges that continued resistance would result only in unnecessary casualties without strategic benefit. Admiral Chun felt the weight of galactic history in that simple statement. The war that had consumed civilization for 8 centuries was ending not with a climactic battle or gradual conquest, but with a rational recognition that the strategic situation had fundamentally changed. "Marshal, preliminary ceasefire terms will include immediate cessation of all hostile operations, withdrawal of forces to designated neutral zones, and establishment of joint commissions to address territorial and resource disputes through negotiation, rather than warfare. These terms are acceptable in principle, Admiral. However, implementation will require coordination across thousands of individual commands throughout the galaxy." Admiral Chun smiled. "Marshal, I think you'll find that our command structure is uniquely qualified to handle complex coordination challenges." As the ceasefire negotiations continued, Admiral Chun reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought humanity from dismissed primitives to galactic peace brokers in less than a year. The war that had seemed eternal was ending, because humans had introduced something that advanced galactic civilizations had forgotten existed: the possibility that complex problems might have simple solutions if you were willing to think outside. Established frameworks. Operation Endgame would be remembered as the military operation that ended galactic war, but Admiral Chun knew that its real significance was proving that the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy could still learn from species they had once considered hopeless. The age of perpetual war was ending. The age of adaptive cooperation was about to begin. 1 year after the end of the 8th Century War, Admiral Sarah Chun stood before the inaugural session of the new Galactic Council, housed in a magnificent space station constructed at the gravitational balance point between the former combatant powers. The chamber itself was a testament to unprecedented cooperation. Architectural elements from dozens of different species combined into a structure that somehow felt both alien and familiar. Esteemed representatives, Admiral Chun began, her voice carrying clearly through translation systems that had been refined to capture not just words but cultural context. 1 year ago, this galaxy was consumed by a war that seemed destined to continue forever. Today, we gather to establish institutions that will ensure such a conflict never occurs again. The assembled delegates represented not just the 3 original powers and their 17 allied species, but 43 additional civilizations that had emerged from isolation or neutrality to participate in the post-war galactic community. It was the largest gathering of intelligent species in recorded history. The transformation has been remarkable, continued High Commander Zethrock, now serving as the Saurian representative to the Council. Military doctrine developed for perpetual conflict has been replaced by adaptive protocols designed for problem-solving and cooperation. Admiral Velthra, her crystalline form now serving as a living symbol of technological and philosophical transformation, flickered through several computational states before responding. The mathematical models describing our current civilization would have been considered impossible under pre-war theoretical frameworks. We have achieved stable complexity through organized flexibility. General Morgoth, representing the insectoid Hive Confederation, added his perspective. The collective consciousness has expanded to incorporate concepts of individual initiative within unified purpose. We have learned to think as one while acting as many. Admiral Chun nodded, feeling both pride and the ongoing weight of responsibility that came with having catalyzed such fundamental change. The question before us today is how we institutionalize the principles that ended the war without losing the flexibility that made peace possible. She activated a holographic display showing the proposed structure of the new Galactic Council. Unlike the rigid hierarchies that had characterized pre-war institutions, the new system was designed around adaptive networks that could reconfigure themselves based on changing circumstances. The Council will operate on principles adapted from human military doctrine, Admiral Chun explained, distributed authority, local autonomy within strategic frameworks, and most importantly, the institutional expectation that successful methods will be modified or abandoned when circumstances change. Ambassador Zixtal of the mediator species, who had overseen much of the transition process, spoke from his position as interim council coordinator. This represents a fundamental shift from governance based on unchanging law to governance based on adaptive response to evolving challenges. It also represents a significant risk, observed Councillor Thelvin of the Arcturus Assembly. Institutional flexibility could lead to chaos if not properly managed. Chaos is only problematic if it interferes with achieving objectives, Admiral Chun replied. Our experience has shown that rigid institutions often prevent effective responses to new challenges, while flexible institutions can adapt to circumstances that their creators never anticipated. The debate that followed touched on fundamental questions of governance, authority, and social organization that went far beyond traditional political science. Representatives were essentially designing civilization itself to operate according to principles that violated most established theories of large-scale organization. How do we maintain unity of purpose while encouraging diversity of approach? Asked a delegate Morkith of the Centauri Syndicate. Through shared objectives rather than shared methods, Admiral Chun responded. Instead of mandating specific policies, we establish desired outcomes and allow local authorities to determine the best approaches for their specific circumstances. What prevents local authorities from pursuing objectives that conflict with overall council purposes? Asked Representative Velkix of the Outer Rim Territories. The same thing that prevented our military units from working at cross purposes. During Operation Endgame, Admiral Chun explained, clear communication of strategic objectives, regular assessment of tactical effectiveness, and institutional culture that prioritizes results over procedures. Admiral Velthra's form brightened as she processed the implications. You're describing institutional learning organizations that improve their performance through experience rather than just following predetermined protocols. Exactly. The new Galactic Council will be designed to get better at governing rather than just governing consistently. The discussions continued for days as representatives worked through the few practical implications of creating governmental institutions based on military doctrine that had revolutionized galactic warfare. The challenges were enormous, but so were the opportunities. We're not just ending a war, Admiral Chun observed during one of the private sessions with senior delegates. We're creating proof that advanced civilizations can continue to evolve and improve rather than becoming trapped by their own sophistication. 6 months later, the new Galactic Council officially commenced operations with Admiral Sarah Chun serving as the first Coordinator General, a position that combined strategic oversight with operational flexibility in ways that traditional governmental theory suggested should be impossible. The early challenges were significant. Local authorities tested the boundaries of their autonomy. Interspecies cultural differences created communication problems. Resource allocation disputes required continuous negotiation rather than settled precedent, but the system worked. Problems were solved more quickly than under traditional bureaucratic approaches. Innovations developed by one member species were rapidly shared with others. Conflicts were resolved through adaptive negotiation rather than rigid legal procedures. Most importantly, the galaxy remained at peace. Final assessment report, Admiral Chun announced to the Council chamber 18 months after the war's end. Galactic productivity has increased by 47%. Interspecies cooperation has reached unprecedented levels. Military expenditures have been reduced by 83% and redirected to exploration, research, and infrastructure development. She paused, looking around the chamber at representatives of species that had been mortal enemies just 2 years earlier. We have accomplished something that no civilization in galactic history has achieved. We have ended perpetual war not through conquest or exhaustion, but through innovation. We have proven that even the most advanced societies can continue to learn and grow. High Commander Zethrak spoke for many when he replied, Admiral Chen, your species has given us more than peace. You have given us the possibility of becoming something better than we were. As the session concluded and representatives began making plans for the next phase of galactic development, Admiral Chen reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. Humanity had arrived in galactic civilization as the species considered too primitive to matter. They were leaving their mark as the species that proved sophistication and wisdom were not the same thing. The galaxy that had once dismissed humans as hopeless had learned that sometimes hope comes from the willingness to try approaches that everyone knows won't work, and sometimes, against all reasonable expectation, they do work. The 8th century war was over. The age of adaptive civilization had begun, and somewhere in the cosmos, other species facing their own impossible challenges might yet discover that the most hopeless situation can become the foundation for unprecedented transformation. After all, if humans could end a galactic war by refusing to fight it properly, anything was possible. Hey there, incredible humans. If this epic journey from hopeless primitives to galactic peace brokers didn't give you serious chills, I don't know what will. This story proves something incredible about our species. We don't just break rules, we break the very idea that some rules can't be broken. Think about this for a moment. In this story, the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy had created warfare so perfect, so mathematically precise that it became impossible to win. It took human ignorance of proper military doctrine to realize that maybe the problem wasn't that they weren't fighting hard enough, maybe the problem was that they were fighting too precisely. I want to know what you think. Drop a comment below telling me which moment hit you the hardest. Was it when the aliens realized humans were winning through organized chaos? When centuries-old fortress systems surrendered in hours? Or when the entire galaxy adopted human flexibility as the foundation of their new civilization? And absolutely, smash that like button if you believe that sometimes being called primitive is actually the highest compliment you can receive. Because apparently, being too unsophisticated to understand why something is impossible might be humanity's greatest superpower. I've got another mind-blowing story lined up that explores what happens when humans encounter an ancient alien artifact that's been testing species for millions of years. Let's just say the test wasn't designed for beings who solve problems by ignoring the rules entirely. You definitely don't want to miss that one. Click the card here or check out the whole playlist for more stories about why the universe consistently underestimates humanity at its own peril. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most advanced thing you can do is refuse to accept that advanced solutions are always better than simple ones. Keep being beautifully, chaotically, unstoppably human. See you in the next one, Galaxy Changers.